The last time I tell this story, I want to tell it right. I have told it wrong before. I have softened it, or cut away the parts that make the teller look bad. I was the crew chief at Calex South for 11 months, and there is a version of this story where I come out clean. That version is a lie. So here is what happened. It was early November, cold enough that the tarmac showed frost at the edges, and we had two A-10s prepped on the hardstand before first light. The mission was close air support for a Marine Rifle Battalion pinned on the ridge above the Sarette Valley. They had radioed in at 0340, taking fire from three directions, no armor, no mortar support, no way off the rock without air cover. The call had come up the chain fast. By 0430, we had both birds fueled, armed, and ready. Lieutenant Colonel Marsh walked the flight line at 0445 with two pilots behind him. Captain Dina Rios was already in the cockpit of Hawk 1, helmet on, harness buckled, running her pre-flight checks. I had watched her do that pre-flight myself. I had watched her do it 100 times, and it was always the same. Steady hands, clean sequence, no wasted motion. She was the sharpest stick on that airfield, and most of us knew it. Marsh stopped below the aircraft and looked up. He said her name once. Then he said the slot had been reassigned to a real stick, and she should stand down. He did not lower his voice. The whole crew heard it. The two pilots behind him heard it. I heard it from 15 feet away. She looked at him for a moment. I remembered that, the pause, and how still she went inside it. Then she unstrapped, pulled her helmet, and climbed down from the aircraft. She did not argue. She did not say a word. She handed the helmet to the crew chief beside me and walked back toward the operations tent without looking at Marsh or at either of the pilots who had taken her place. I watched her go and I said nothing. Captain Erickson took Hawk 1. Captain Briggs took Hawk 2. Both pilots did their own pre-flights. By 0510, we had them both running and rolling toward the runway threshold. Hawk 2 lifted cleanly. Hawk 1 taxied 30 feet and stopped. The radio call came back to the tower inside 2 minutes. Avionics fault. Multiple warning lights, Erickson aborting. He rolled back to the hard stand and shut down. Maintenance ran to the aircraft. The fault was real. A wiring failure in the fire control system that would have left him blind in the targeting seat over the ridge. It was not a fault he had caused. It was not sabotage. It was the kind of thing that happens to aircraft in constant use in a forward theater, and it grounded Hawk 1 for the rest of the morning. Briggs was airborne and gone. One bird for a three-direction ambush is thin cover. The Marines on the ridge had been in contact for 90 minutes. I was standing at the hard stand when I heard the door of the operations tent open behind me. Captain Rios came out with her helmet under her arm. She walked past me without a word and kept walking toward the reserve aircraft, Hawk 3, which had been cleared for flight the afternoon before, but not assigned to this mission. She climbed up to the cockpit and began strapping in. Marsh was across the tarmac. He saw her. He started toward the aircraft. She already had the radio in her hand. She was talking to the tower. I do not know exactly what was said in the next 4 minutes between her and Marsh and the tower and the operations officer on duty. I know that when it was over, Marsh was standing on the tarmac with his arms at his sides, and Hawk 3 was cleared for takeoff. I know that the operations officer on duty that morning was Major Aldrin, who had seen the Marine Battalion's last radio traffic and made a call. I know that Rios did not wait for a second clearance. She taxied to the threshold and held for 12 seconds while the tower gave her the weather package, then she was rolling. I watched the aircraft lift off into a sky that was still gray at the edges, the engine sound hammering across the valley before it thinned out to nothing. One aircraft, one pilot, no wingman. What happened over the Sarette Valley Ridge that morning is in the official record, and I will tell it plainly. She arrived on station at 0544. The Marines were pinned in a cut below the ridgeline, taking fire from an elevated position to the north and suppressing fire from 2 positions to the east. They had 1 dead and 11 wounded and no way to move the wounded without breaking cover. Captain Briggs had already made 2 passes and drawn the northern position's fire, but could not suppress the eastern flanks. The terrain blocked his angles. She worked it differently. She came in from the west, low and fast, and her first pass took the northern position off the ridge with a gun run that the battalion commander later described in his report as the tightest approach he had seen in 2 combat tours. The Marines began moving the wounded. She turned for the eastern flanks and made 2 more passes in under 6 minutes, suppressing both positions long enough for the battalion to break contact and begin pulling back down the far slope. On the 3rd pass, a ground-to-air round struck the port engine. She did not break off. She stayed on the run until the eastern position was suppressed, then climbed and turned south for Calex South on a single engine with the port nacelle on fire and the fuselage taking secondary fragmentation damage from the round's debris. She declared the emergency at 0602 and landed at 0619. The aircraft came down the runway with the port engine trailing a thin ribbon of black smoke and the gear coming down hard on contact. She rolled to the end of the runway and stopped. The fire crews were already moving. She shut down the starboard engine, opened the canopy, and climbed down from the aircraft on her own before the ladder reached the fuselage. I was at the edge of the flight line. Every crew chief, every maintenance technician, every pilot who had not been airborne was standing there. Marsh was standing there. He had not moved from that spot in 40 minutes. She walked away from the aircraft in her flight suit, with her helmet under her arm, and she was limping. A fragment from the secondary damage had cut through the lower fuselage and nicked her left calf through the suit. She had not radioed it in. She walked evenly, and if you had not known to look for it, you would not have seen the limp. She walked past Marsh. He was quiet for a moment, then he came to attention. Then he rendered a full formal salute. She returned it, clean and correct, and kept walking. Squadron Commander Aldrin was the next to come to attention. Then the crew chiefs. Then the pilots who were standing on the line. One by one, without a word from anyone, without any order given. By the time she reached the operations tent, the whole flight line was at attention, and the only sound was the tick of the cooling starboard engine behind her. She went inside. She did not stop. She did not look back. The Marines came off the ridge that afternoon. 341 personnel extracted alive. One aircraft, one engine, one pilot over the Serret Valley. The official record logs Captain Rios's call sign that morning as Ironside. She had been flying under that call sign for 3 years before I ever met her. I had simply never been told. I have thought about that morning every year since I rotated out of Calac South. I have thought about the moment she climbed down from the cockpit when Marsh ordered her out, and how still she went, and how I stood 15 feet away and said nothing. I have thought about the reserve aircraft and the 4 minutes at the tower, and Major Aldrin's decision, and how thin a thing it was. One man willing to make a call. I was not willing to make that call. I want to say that plainly. She carried the whole thing alone and put it down without ceremony. She never mentioned my silence or anyone else's. She signed the post-flight report, had the wound dressed, and was back at the flight line for the evening maintenance brief. That is the story. I have told it once or twice to people I thought could use it. The part I always end on is not the gun run or the burning engine. It is the flight line going silent and coming to attention, one person at a time, with no one giving the order. Some things happen because a room finally understands what it is looking at. That morning, a flight line full of men understood it all at once, and none of us needed to be told what to do. We already knew.